We will go ahead and jump right in as usual with our guest speaker, and then I do have a few quick updates for everybody afterwards. So today we're joined by Dr. Dia Lawrence of UF-IFAS. You may know her from the UF-IFAS assessment, which is a really important project that she coordinates relating to both predicting and evaluating invasive plants in Florida, or plants that may become invasive or that currently are. And so today she's going to talk about Florida's plant list and plant listing, kind of helping to demystify some of the confusion amongst the different types of lists and types of resources that we have in Florida to kind of decide what plants are invasive. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lawrence.
Okay, hold on.
And I'll just add, because I always forget to say this, if you have any questions as we go, feel free to pop them in the chat box. I'll keep an eye there, and we'll either break in or we'll address questions at the end.
All right, thank you, Emily, for the introduction and the invitation to present this really important information if you're handling invasive plants or non-native plants in the state, or if you're just trying to make decisions for what plants you want to put in your front yard in your flower beds and stuff. So in this talk, I'm going to give you a little background on why we have so many lists, describe the regulatory and non-regulatory definitions, go through the federal noxious weed list, the Florida noxious weed list with a little discussion on the aquatics, and then the FLEPC, now FISC list, Florida Invasive Species Council, and then go into the IFAS assessment. And in between, I'm going to give you information on some of the ways that plants are included on these lists where appropriate. So just, we're all here in Florida. We know we have problems with invasive species, but we've been dealing with this for decades. If you think about the Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants was established in the 70s. The Strangers in Paradise, the classic invasion book, was written about Florida. We've been dealing with this for a while. And because we've been dealing with this for so long, there is an overabundance of resources that are available regarding invasive species. And then once you're trying to go through that information, navigating those resources can be a little confusing for the public. So just for listing alone for plants, that's the purpose of this talk, is to clear up some of that confusion so that you know how to pick the right plant for your needs. So because we have so many plant lists here in the state, it's not simply good enough to say it's on the list. So we're going to go through those lists. But first we'll define regulatory and non-regulatory. Regulatory lists prevent the sale, movement, or spread of listed species. There are usually legal and financial penalties for violating these terms when enforced. And these are maintained and enforced by federal or state agencies. A lot of times folks will get a warning, if these things, you violate these terms, but it is important to note that if it is regulated, there can be legal and financial penalties. Non-regulatory lists serve as recommendations or guidelines. These lists are based on criteria such as reproductive traits, negative impacts, management difficulty, things like that. And these individual listings are often supported with invasion risk or status assessments. So in most cases, there's something behind it. We're not just sitting in a room and putting things on a list. So today we're going to talk about the 5 major plant lists in Florida. It's important to note that there are other lists out there, even within University of Florida. For example, the Florida Friendly Landscaping, they maintain a list of native and non-native plants that have cleared for their purposes. There's EDRR lists. A lot of those times we're coordinating efforts so that, as you move through the different little sub lists, we're trying to get the same message out there. But for these purposes, there are five major lists. So just to go through the regulatory list, first we have the federal noxious weed list. So in 1975, the Federal Noxious Weed Act was enacted to establish a federal program to control the spread of weeds. Primarily, most of these species, the initial push was for agricultural weeds. These listings fall into the hands of the Department of Agriculture, and if a species is included on the list, it restricts all interstate or foreign movement of that species. This has been amended a couple of times. So in 1990, it was amended to require federal land management agencies to take appropriate measures to reduce the spread of those listed species. So not just having it on a list. If you've got those species in your national park or whatever, you need to include that in your management plan, how you're addressing managing those species. In 2000, it was incorporated into the Plant Protection Act and fell under the jurisdiction of APHIS, USDA APHIS. Movement is still prohibited without a permit, and those permits come from APHIS PPQ. There are the penalties that are associated with this: seizure of plant material, implementation of misdemeanor fines. They actually do enforce this. I have a friend who his first job with APHIS was part of that enforcement team. So he would do internet research and find things like, say a citrus, even an ornamental citrus that came from Florida and was shipped out of state, they would go and seize it. And he did go and take people's stuff. If it was, they have a priority list, but that's just an example of, trying to contain citrus canker or citrus greening. But in terms of a federal response, there are folks who are enforcing these things. This list was last updated in 2010, and there was a minor update in 2017. I will say I have spoken with the folks at APHIS about this list and how you get species put on the list. And this one seems to be a pretty complicated process, which would be reflected in the fact that it's not as frequently updated. But I do know that they use data from other states. So for example, if we were to list something here in Florida, and it's also listed in the Carolinas and maybe in Texas, well, that supports petitions that they might have at a federal level. So some federally listed species that we have here in Florida include Kogan grass, hydrilla, Japanese climbing fern, tropical soda apple, melaleuca, and giant salvinia. Some of these species are also cross-listed on our state list. So just be aware of that. We're going to move on now to the prohibited aquatic plant list, which was created in 1986 and amended in 93. Originally administered by DEP, looking to eradicate, control, or prevent the introduction and movement of listed aquatic plants. The invasive aquatics were merged with the Florida Noxious Weed List in 2020. And as far as I know, I just spoke with Patty, who's on this call. The aquatic list still exists, but eventually, those invasives will be pulled off of that list and just live on the next one that I will talk about. So we can kind of think about this one as being gone and move on to the Florida State Noxious Weed List. Again, those aquatics have been moved into this one. The Florida Noxious Weed List was created in 1993, and this one has been amended multiple times. FDAX oversees this list and controls the addition of new species, exemptions for agronomic and horticultural cultivars of listed species. And I apologize, we're going to have barking. There's a delivery happening, of course, right now. So I will mute here in a second if it gets bad. But the noxious weed list restricts all interstate or foreign movement of listed species, and Division of Plant Industry does enforce this list with inspections and fines. So here's just a little more information on the state list. It's unlawful to introduce, multiply, possess, move, or release any noxious weed without a permit. This includes 3 genera of parasitic plants, more than 70 species. Again, this is a little redundant, but historically limited to upland species. And historically, some aquatics were in the list, but now it's all together. So I'll just run through how to petition a species. It's essentially these steps. You fill out a petition, submit it to FDAX. They will schedule a meeting and hear evidence, and the committee will vote. Then the decision and supporting evidence is sent to Tallahassee, where the legislator approves the rule change. And then species, as far as I know, are usually added in that winter session. So you can get to the petition from the Fresh from Florida website here with freshfromflorida.com/08215.pdf. And this is what it looks like at the top. And when you're filling these out, the information that you would include would be a summary of life history, information about habitat suitability, dispersal, and economic and environmental impacts. And I think one of the most important questions in the petition is to answer, how will the inclusion of this species hinder the invasion of the species? So, you know, in shorter form, what's it going to do? If we put it on this list, how is it going to affect that plant invasion? So once you do that and submit it, next up you meet with FDAX, and these are public meetings, and they are formal. We also, experts are included in this, so a lot of representation from IFAS, the weed science folks, invasion ecologists, also the nursery industry. So there are other experts in the room that are weighing in and discussing these petitions after the petitioner makes their case. So you know, it's a nice process. A lot of questions are asked and answered, and then once that's finished, FDAX committee votes, and then that decision is sent to Tallahassee for the rule change. And here it's where it gets a little muddy. It's unclear how this proceeds to me. I'm sure that others might, a little more plugged in, might know how it goes down once it hits the legislative session. But important to note that sometimes this can be delayed. And that could be for whatever reason. So maybe it was on the schedule and we have some major hurricanes and they have to bump, you know, move that down in priority to discuss other things. Some of the examples of Florida listed species, this includes, these are some recent additions. Beach Vitex was petitioned by me on behalf of the Invasive Plant Working Group at UF. Japanese honeysuckle, I did this one as well on behalf of Florida Invasive Species Council. At the time, it was still Flepsy. And then cat's claw vine, that was Kristen Mason from Flepsy, now Fisk. There are a couple of others that were just waiting to be added, calorie pear and camphor tree. So that's all the regulation that we have that we need to be concerned about. Now we'll move on to non-regulatory lists. And here we have, we'll start with the Florida Invasive Species Council, again, formerly known as Flepsy. Just to let you know, I talked about another long history of invasive the way that we deal with invasive species in Florida. FLEPSI was established in 1984, so it's been around for a long time. I believe the first invasive plant council in the U.S. So we did go through a name change to Florida Invasive Species Council in 2020 because we wanted to retire outdated terminology. So we want to get rid of exotic. So this is one of the reasons why we went with this name change. And here's our mission statement: to reduce the impacts of invasive plants in Florida through the exchange of scientific, educational, and technical information. While I'm talking about this, I just want to be clear that I'm the current chair of FISC and on the plant listing committee. So, you know, FLEPSI, now FISC, provides, you know, some services to the community. So we have, you know, we do an annual symposium, provide CEUs for that at a pretty reasonable rate. We do some community outreach. We have grants that we give out for research and CISMAs and other educational programming. But one of the most sort of accessed service that we offer is our plant list. The plant list is updated every 2 years. We have moved in our new website design to sort of this listing with, you can see, you know, here is the scientific name, common name. We provide our rank. So they're kind of mixed up a little bit here, but we wanted to keep them in alphabetical order. We do have links that we provide now to EdMaps, the IFAS assessment, Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plant information sheets, and then invasive.org links, which provides more information and a lot of really great photos of these species. We also added right here the horticulture, and this is just whether or not it's available in for sale. So one of our hopes in the future is to offer sort of a landowners source or landowners page, homeowners page on the FISC website, so we can do polls directly over, like, here's the plants that you should avoid that are for sale. So that's something we're hoping to do in the future. Also would like to mention that, you know, we do print every 2 years. We missed 2021 because of COVID. So we're working on that now. We've made some additions, we made some, you know, some minor changes. And one of the things that we discussed at our last meeting was that we can, instead of waiting every 2 years to give y'all, you know, what we've been doing, we can update those more regularly. So the new additions will be on the website. The website will have the most current list, and then twice a year, every 2 years, we'll print out our glossies. But we are going to reduce the amount of trifolds that we are printing, just because you know, the website is designed to work on your phone, and we're trying to get away from you know, excess printing. So the committee is comprised of biologists, botanists, ecologists, and land managers. We can consider the addition of new species and any changes that might happen in the status of species already included. So does a category 2 need to move up? Do we need to start pulling things over from the watch list? Our listings are based on scientific information and field observations. It's very similar to the petitioning process for the noxious weed list. So on the criteria sheet, very similar information is shared. Distribution, impacts, management, you know, how do you manage it? So once that is submitted, we have a few days or weeks to review the material before we meet. And once we meet, usually the person that submitted the criteria sheet will do very similar to the other process. They're going to present their evidence, we're going to have a discussion, and then consensus is required to make changes or additions to the list. So we vote. And then once that's finished, it goes to the FISC board of directors, and they do the final votes before something is officially added. To my knowledge, they've never been like, we disagree. So it's just a formal part of our SOPs. Oops. Okay, so we do have two categories that you should be familiar with. Category 1, shown to alter native plant communities by displacing native species, changing community structures or ecological functions, or hybridizing with natives. Category 2s have increased in abundance or frequency, but have not yet altered Florida plant communities to the extent shown by our category 1s. And here's just a few examples of some of the species. There is quite a few of our prohibited species on the also on the FISC list. So there is some overlap there. But here you can see Nandina, earleaf acacia, bishopwood, and lantana. We also have some examples here of your category 2s. This one right here just might be a little bit of sidebar, but our bottle brushes, I have been, told that these are starting to be seen in natural areas. It seems the bottle brushes are starting to escape, but here are some of the other category 2s. I'm going to take a step away from actually talking about the list to just interject a little project that I've been working on with other invasive plant councils. So we received a small grant to organize a working group, and we have North and South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. So 7 states are participating, and we are working to standardize the way that we list plants on these council lists for the region, with the hope that when this takes off, that we can start moving through to some of the other councils in the United States. So we could get as many councils doing the same thing as possible. It would make communicating about these things a lot easier. So the problem is that most states do have at least one non-regulatory plant list. Some have multiple. And we do have 30 invasive plant councils in the United States, with few of those councils using the same criteria for listing. And this leads to little continuity across our councils, which has resulted in lists that are often well suited to regional needs, but there's poor translation across state lines. And so the national IPSI, basically, they were participating in some widespread development of standards for green planning or green listing, ASTM standards that went on and on. I was actually years ago asked to give a talk about risk assessment for these folks, and it just drug on, and some, for whatever reason, it got torpedoed. I believe it happened in public comment, and there was some pushback from the horticulture industry. But the national IPSI took what was left of that and basically developed a checklist of standards for the development and updating of invasive plant lists. And they wanted to make sure that all the councils are using the highest standards for objectivity, scientific rigor, and ecological expertise, that those procedures are transparent and clearly documented, and that we are using consistent methodology to assure that comparability across state lists. So we started meeting, I'm doing this in collaboration with Leancy Lowenstein in Alabama, Chuck Bargeron in Georgia, and David Coyle up at Clemson. So it's a multi-state effort, again, with those 7 states involved. We started initially, the plan was to meet with each of the councils, find out how they were doing it, and then give them a prescription for how to meet the national standards. If you do this, 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 and this, you will be compliant with the national standards. But once we realized after 2 meetings that everybody was kind of in the same place, we're all like kind of thinking about what we're working on, how we're doing it. At least 4 of the states were in a position where they had to review their list. Maybe they don't have a state list, a noxious weed list, like in Georgia. So municipalities are using their Georgia EPSI list to make decisions about management, prioritization, and spending, but there was no data behind it. So they're in a position where they need to, they're justifying their list. Other states, it was time to go through and see if the Cat 2s or, if whatever they call their 2 tiers had been moving around or needed to move up. So it was a really good time to think of it in a different way. So we, as a group, decided that we would build a status assessment tool that we're calling Regional Invasive Plant Regional Invasive Plant Status Assessment. And so this tool is based on Nancy Lowenstein in Alabama was doing work on. She took the IFAS assessment, status assessment tool, some stuff that Teresa Cully was working on up in Ohio, the Nature Serve had put out a publication on how to do these status assessments as well. So she built it. She built their version that we then took and we're amending to kind of have everybody has a say in the questions. And make it easier to kind of do little tweaks for each state. But generally it has 2 pre-screening questions that starts with, is the species included on noxious or prohibited plant lists? If it's on your state list, maybe your group doesn't want to waste their time, that we're all volunteers. So they can bump that down in priority and focus on the ones that aren't listed by the state, or they can do it anyway. You also document the known distribution of the species. In Florida, we're separated by north, south, central, and south. I think Tennessee is going to go more, east to west. So folks are figuring out how to put their zones in. That's something we're working on as a group. And then once you do that, you document that distribution, then you go into the actual questions that are determine the outcome. So we have 31 weighted multiple choice assessment questions right now. We might have a couple more. I'd like to get more information in there about projections with climate change. But these sections are grouped into 4 sections: ecological and sociological impacts. We have questions about ecological impacts, impacts to recreation, impacts to agriculture, forestry, and right-of-ways, specific questions about how a species might interact with our threatened and endangered species, things like that. Then current distribution and abundance. So we want to document where the species is and how much of that species, what percentage of that area is contributing to those impacts in the first section. And then we have our spread potential. So now this is the predictive element in this. So based on some questions about dispersal availability in trade, things like that, and where the species is and what it's by. Then we do some predicting about what we think, how we think it's going to spread. And then finally, management difficulty. So how much does it cost? Do you have to retreat after, how many times do you have to do retreatments? Is it hard to get to? Things like that to determine your management difficulty. And then you get a score for each of these, and then we go through and assign. We have made one change here. We got rid of the moderates for distribution and management. Those are just high and lows, but impacts and potential are high, moderate, and low. And how these work out is how we determine our categorization. So if you're almost everything, all of the highs for impacts are Cat 1, and most of the moderates for impacts. But, if we say down here, you want a category 2, we have moderate impacts and low distribution, low potential to spread, and it's not hard to kill. Well, we're going to throw that in the category 2 because of this moderate impact. So that's kind of how we group these. We're currently testing this to make sure our thresholds are okay, but I have the buy-in for all 7 states, which is kind of amazing. That we will be doing the same thing, the same way as we list species, with the hope that we can then take this nationally and try to get as many of those 30 councils to use the same tool. I'm also, once this gets shored up with the councils, am going to think about using this for the assessment. It's much simpler than the current status assessment. It includes all the same information, but the way that we answer these questions, I can do a lot more with literature to be able to get a lot of our incompletes finished. And I'll explain why we have incompletes now. So that's a really nice segue into the IFAS assessment. So this is the program I oversee at UF. Basically, we use literature-based assessment tools to evaluate the invasion status or risk of non-native species. And important to note that all IFAS faculty and staff cannot, and volunteers, cannot recommend species either invasive or high risk. And if they are in the middle, if they're moderate risk or cautions, they should absolutely be communicating that those should be managed to prevent escape. So we have 3 tools: the predictive tool to evaluate the risk before a species enters the state, the status assessment to evaluate a species that's here. So think of that's a prediction versus a diagnosis. And then finally, the Infraspecific Taxon protocol to evaluate the invasion risk of cultivars, which right after I get off this call, I'm running over for a meeting to talk about 7 cultivars today. So that is currently being used. But the predictive tool is based on the Australian weed risk assessment model. It's sort of the gold standard, very easy to use, highly accurate, and easy to modify for your specified region. So we did modify some questions about climate, precipitation, soil type, so that this is specific for Florida, and we actually break it down by zone. There are a series of 49 questions based on the history of invasiveness elsewhere, biological traits, persistent attributes. How does it disperse, things like that. And so we do evaluate species that are new to the state, but we also look at species that are proposed for a new use, which I will explain in a moment. And then sometimes on specific requests. So Florida-friendly landscaping, I mentioned at the beginning, they contacted me recently because they had a gap in what they were recommending in their list. They needed more small stature trees. So they had us evaluate 2 trees that, they were like, okay, if these come out low risk, we're gonna go ahead and put them on our options. So that was really nice to see them being proactive. We've done about 212 species so far, including that beach Videx that was listed. But moving on to these species proposed for new use. Florida has something called the non-native species planting permit. It's a rule that states that you cannot cultivate non-native plants in plantings greater than 2 contiguous acres without a permit. So to do this, applicants must provide information regarding what species is being planted, where, and how much, any containment methods that they intend to use to prevent inadvertent spread, and the estimated cost to remove and destroy the planting. The IFAS assessment is written into this rule. We do the risk assessments for these species. So they might be species that have been in Florida for years, like Pongamia, used as a horticulture species, but now Terviva is planting hundreds and hundreds of acres, or changing the amount of propagule pressure on the landscape. So we do the risk assessment, and that, along with the petition, goes to FDACS, and then the applications can be rejected if the invasion risk is too high and the risk cannot be mitigated with best management practices. They can be permitted and monitored with those BMPs and a surety bond. Think of that as a down payment on removing the species or the planting if they want to abandon it for any reason. Or exempted from permitting if the species does not present a significant risk. And here's just some of the species we've looked at. That's tongue oil at the top, energy cane, this eucalyptus, moringa. We've got a couple of polonias. which I'll keep giving little nods to the next slide, but I'll talk about Paulownia here in a second. Some large statured grasses. This Millettia pinnata is your palm oil tree, and some bamboos, Phylostachys edulis and Calamus asper are two of those species. Speaking of Paulownia, there's been renewed interest in planting Paulownia in the region for biomass planting and also for woodworking purposes, but basically they want to pellet, grind it up and make pellets to burn. And it's this species is a high risk. The Paulownias that are being proposed are high risk for invasion. And this is because the contributing characteristics, history of invasiveness elsewhere. They produce abundant seed that's wind dispersed and remains viable for more than 3 years in the seed bank. So these are all characteristics that we wouldn't want 1,000 acres of planted around the state. I'm also illustrating here's a new addition to the assessment, our habitat or climate suitability maps. So basically this is an ArcGIS layer map looking at climate classifications, hardiness zones, precipitation, and elevation. We are presenting these maps, providing these maps for the region, the southeastern region, but all the little hash marks, those are actual records in EdMaps. So this just gives an idea of where the climate will be suitable for these species to grow. It indicates where the risk does apply along with those risk assessments. Moving on to the status assessment, we look at species again that are already here, and we describe based on those ecological impacts. This is a little redundant from the previous slides about the status assessment tool. Both tools are based on the same model that started, it was published by NatureServe in the early 2000s. This one does add a couple questions about economic value. Those questions are just documented. It does not affect the outcome of the assessment. We do incorporate field data from experts. We have over 500 species. We do have a lot of incompletes because it's a lot of work and a lot of burden to put on our land managers. This is why I have hope with that other tool that we will be able to include that expert information, the expert data, but also be able to fill in the gaps with some, observations in EdMaps and stuff from the literature. The final tool is the Infraspecific Taxon protocol, and it looks at cultivars, varieties, and subspecies. And generally, we just want to make sure that this cultivar is not going to be invasive as the parent species is invasive. So we've done a bunch of Ruilias. These are all cautions because they do still sucker and spread a little bit that way. And our lantanas are, the lantanas that have passed have sterile pollen. They don't produce fruit, that kind of stuff. They don't spread vegetatively. So this is done mostly internally. A request is submitted to me. We do the assessments, and then it goes to the invasive plant working group, which we are meeting in just about an hour. So some of the stuff that we consider, we want data indicating it will be distinguished from the wild type or parent species, evidence it won't regress, revert, or hybridize, evidence it's not going to be, that it's going to be non-invasive as compared to the parent species. And we're looking for, information on pollen viability, reduced fecundity, sterility, and vegetative spread. So here's the IFAS assessment website, over 900 species conclusions, and you can filter these by zone, growth form, all that stuff, and download lists as you see fit. Our conclusions are color-coded like a stoplight. So for predictive tool conclusions, you're going to see terminology like high invasion risk predicted to be invasive. This is because, we want to be very clear that we're not saying it's already doing this. We are predicting that it would if you keep planning it. So our moderate risks, those are, should be treated with caution, manage to prevent escape. We do have a secondary tool, screening tool, that's what the evaluate means. And a lot of times the secondary screening will put it either in high or low, but if it doesn't, it stays in that category where it's firmly a moderate risk. And then finally, low invasion risk. Green means go. This one should be okay based on the data that we have. Status assessment conclusions, invasive no uses or invasive. This is not to be recommended by IFAS, faculty, staff, volunteers, mascots, anybody. So we do reevaluate these every 10 years. Something that is invasive won't go down. We just want to keep adding our information so our files are current. Cautions get reevaluated every 2 years. We're kind of trying to keep an eye on what that species is doing. And again, if you are recommending these and you represent the university, you should manage to communicate that these should be managed to prevent escape. And then the not a problem species, again, green means go. Undocumented means it's not currently in a natural area. Documented means it is, but it's not causing any issues. Okay, I'm going to make a shift just because of the audience. This is unrelated but timely. We are currently compiling or assembling a new network called the Southeast Regional Invasive Species and Climate Change. And so I'm one of the founding members with Brett Sheffers from UF Wildlife and Wesley Daniel from USGS. Basically, this is, we're trying to address issues about, the intersections of climate change and how climate science could influence invasive species management. And we want to make sure the research is informing the management is communicating their needs. The managers are communicating their needs. Important to note that we have this is a regional, these are, I'll show you the breakdown, but this will be the whole Southeast. In the region, we have a whole bunch of different kinds of environments, including our coastal plains, the Appalachian Mountains. We have over 29,000 miles of coastline. We do know that climate change is increasing temperature across the Southeast. And then that, since the 70s, that temperature has increased by about 2 degrees, and it's projected to increase by 4 to 8 degrees by the end of this century. We also know, this is what this graph, this figure is showing, that there are more predicted days over 95 degrees and fewer predicted freezing events. So we have to think about, stuff that's down here is going to start moving out as the climate shifts. And we also have our own set of issues, right? So we have all this coastline, we have to deal with sea level rise. We also have changes in fire dynamics with, differences in intensity and frequency of these fires. Urbanization compounds all of this with changes of land use. And then finally, as illustrated by these hurricanes just stacked up, I forget what year this was, we're having more extreme weather events more often. So Southeast risk, our region is of importance because we have these species down here that are currently suppressed by cooler climates, and climate change could release them to serve as a possible seed source for invasion for other regions, the other risk regions. And we also have our own unique interactions. So we're assembling this working network. I will say this is the way it breaks down. This is our southeastern states. Northeast already has a risk group. They were sort of the OGs. They really put the model down for us to follow. Midwest is currently forming. North Central is active. Northwest, Pacific Islands, and the Southwest and South Central are also in negotiation to get started with the idea that we cover the whole United States. We also have some buy-in from some folks in a chunk of Canada. So we'll be able to do these like big picture, sort of projects and, workshops to try to figure out how we're going to address climate change and invasive species, but we'll also be able to drill down in our own individual regions. We also get Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, which we're excited about. Okay, look for that information. I'll be communicating, looking for folks to sign up for our listserv and start participating very soon. But I'll just start to wrap this up. Our take-home points today that there are 4 primary plant lists available to the public now that we have merged the aquatic and the terrestrial lists. Some of these are regulatory, some are non-regulatory. Be mindful that improper handling of state and federal listed species, this could result in legal consequences. I 2 years ago, it was during pandemic, someone was selling these beautiful Brazilian pepper tree wreaths at Christmas, and she was very sad to find out she couldn't sell those, but those are the kind of things that we would want to keep an eye out for. Category 1 and 2 species and high risk and invasive conclusions should be avoided by the general public due to their invasion status or potential. Again, not regulated, but we're trying to get you to do the right thing, to make the right choices. And all IFAS faculty, staff, and volunteers must follow the conclusions of the assessment. And then finally, using these lists correctly can reduce non-native plant invasions in Florida and throughout the Southeast. I do have these links to resources that we can provide. But you know, there's lists for the federal list, the noxious weed list. We also have, there is an EDIS document called Lost in the Weeds that I prepared with Lynn Geddes that breaks all this down and provides your links. Also, there's an EDIS for the non-native planting rule. And then finally, an EDIS on the general assessment. And then this is, oops, ignore this, it doesn't count here, but this is how you get into the website and how you can contact me. So I will stop the share and take questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dia. I am getting a few of those links in the chat box. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to unmute or raise your Zoom hand or type in the chat box. It's a lot of information and a lot of great work, some really important programs to be aware of. You know, I personally am just so grateful for the work that Dia and the whole community of practice that she's put together is doing, as well as the part that then coordinates and the work that is done by FDAC's DPI. We do have Patty Anderson on the call today. And that group is critical in the regulatory components of this. So, and they work really hard to prevent and control invasive plants. So thank you so much, Dia. And this, just a reminder that we will post a recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel. So you will be able to access this information there as well. I do have some updates just really quickly. Big news, and actually owe everyone an email about this, but our new CISMA websites have gone live. So we've been working on this for a few years now. Apologies if you can hear that. There's an old dog clattering around back there. So we've been working on this for quite some time now with our partners over at Bugwood at UGA. I want to give a huge shout out to Sarah Jean, who is our tech guru from that group, along with Chuck Bargeron. Excuse me. And so essentially what we've done is we've moved both the FISC website and all of the CISMA sites over to a WordPress platform. And we really have just simplified and cleaned up the entire look of those websites. So they should be much easier to navigate and find information. Here, this text is all small, but this is basically just a breakdown of what your pages look like. So your home page has an About Us box, a list of partners, and a place to put projects and exciting work you're doing. The tab up here, you've got a Learn More About drop down. There, that will go to events, an events calendar. And then really this is customizable for each CISMA. So this is Six River CISMA. They wanted to do a Dirty Dozen list. This includes plants and animals that are already invasive in their area. And so not all CISMAs have this, but they certainly can. All of the CISMAs do have a page for educational resources and publications, as well as a link to the statewide private landowner program assistance page, which is on the FISP website. The next tab over is EDRR, and this is what the EDRR pages look like. Gone are the days of linking to the old PDF spreadsheets. And so you can see here, it's laid out in a nice table, and you've got links to more information. Each CISMA maintains an EDRR list. So that's another one of those lists that Dia was referencing. But essentially what these CISMAs endeavor to do is maintain a list of plants to really keep an eye out for, or to get on top of as soon as they show up, because they're not widespread on that local regional level. And then each CISMA page has a local private lands assistance page. That's what this looks like over here. And on these pages, you're going to find links to your APHIS extension offices, your FWC landowner assistance contact, your county foresters, and any other programs that may be available in that region. So really excited about that. We do have a training scheduled for June 14th for folks in CISMAs who are interested in being able to help keep their websites up. The CISMAs are going to have access to there he is again. The CISMAs are going to have access to make simple updates to their own pages, but we will also always have that technical support from Bugwood as well. Just real quick, some upcoming events. Treasure Coast is hosting a social on June 9th. If you're down in that area, great group of people to network with. We're awaiting more details, but there is a in-person Python handling training scheduled. I believe that one's going to be down towards the Keys. Big news though, I want everyone to save the date for the July 19th through 20th for the annual Everglades Invasive Species Summit, back in person, I believe for the first time in at least 2 years, possibly 3. And then these bigger events that we have on the list as well, the UF Aquatic short course coming up in August, of course, NASMA conference coming up in November, and Innovations in Invasive Species Management, that's up in Nashville, Tennessee. Some announcements. Dia mentioned when she was talking about FISC that they offer grants. And so recently they had their RFPs out for the research and CISMA grants. Those have closed, but the RFP for the education grant just recently went out. And so the deadline for that is June 24th. They're looking for projects that support education and outreach on invasive plants and their impacts. So if you have something in mind, check that out. The contact is Sarah Kittredge with TNC. And if you get my emails, that was included in the email that went out today, along with the PDF RFP. If you need that, you can either email Sarah or just email me and I can forward it along to you. So I think that's pretty much it for today. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Just a reminder of our call schedule through the rest of this year. We have, I'm really looking forward to next month, non-native flatworms in Florida. That's one I get questions about and don't know much about. So Dr. Tim Collins is going to join us. We have Jessica Spencer with US Army Corps is going to talk to us in July about what the Army Corps does and the mass amount of invasive species programs they have here in Florida. We're going to hear from the Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants in August, and we'll be back with Dr. Lawrence in September to talk about her horizon scanning work, some other really great programs going on. And as I mentioned, these calls are recorded and posted on our YouTube channel, so it typically takes me a few days to get them up. So look for this one by the end of the week. And with that, thank you everybody so much, and look forward to seeing you again in whatever next month is, June. Have a great rest of your week, everybody.